Ladies and gentlemen, after we swear in the witness, I'm going to give you a instruction.
Miss, would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. You may be seated.
Take a seat, and if your face is on it for that moment, you can sit.
Good morning. There's been a motion in the case to sequester witnesses. All that means is until the evidence is over, you may only be in the courtroom when you're testifying. You can't talk about your testimony with the other witnesses or allow them to talk about their testimony with you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll recall during my preliminary instructions I told you about two types of evidence. I told you about testimony of witnesses and exhibits, and I said there might be two other types of evidence, and if they arise, I would tell you about them. One, judicial notice. We've already had judicial notice in one instance. Another type of evidence is a stipulation or agreement between the parties. And is this stipulation as to fact or as to what the testimony would be? As to fact?
Fact.
Okay. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a stipulation between counsel, and I'll ask Ms. Regan if she could please read it to the jury.
Stipulation regarding DNA standards. The parties agree the attached documents are respectively the YSPR DNA profile of Mr. Chism and the STR DNA profile of Mr. Chism and Ms. Ritzer. The defendant agrees that the Commonwealth need not call Kara Tremblay an analyst who processed these standards, and that they can be testified to by the analyst, Ms. Castor, who's on the stand. Further, the defendant agrees that the YSTR standard for the defendant may be included in a comparison chart shown to the jury and admitted for identification. And Ms. McDougall and I have agreed to this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Regan. Yes, please, Ms. McDougall.
Good morning, ma'am. In a loud, clear voice, can you state your first and last names?
Yes, my name is Colleen Ritzer.
And can you spell your first and last names, please?
Yes. S-H-E-A-U-L-I-N-G. Last name Castor, K-A-S-T-O-R.
And Ms. Castor, how are you employed?
I'm employed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the DNA unit.
How long have you been employed by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
Approximately 7.5 years.
And I'm just going to ask you to keep your voice up because the projector's now on, so it makes things a little harder to hear. And can you describe for us your educational background, please?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Fairfield University and a master's degree in forensic science from the University of New Haven.
And when you arrived at this, when you were first employed by the crime lab, did you undergo any training in-house?
Yes, I was required to complete in-house training. It's a 6-month period where I processed mock DNA samples. I interpreted DNA samples. I took classroom time and also had written and oral tests. And I also completed competency tests before I was signed off as a certified DNA analyst.
And do you undergo ongoing quality assurance controls throughout the lab, both in terms of your capacities as well as in terms of the testing that you're doing?
Yes, that's correct. I am undergoing proficiency tests every 6 months. It's a test given by an outside agency where I am given samples and I process it as if it were casework. I report the DNA profiles that I obtain, and I get a satisfactory or an unsatisfactory mark.
And are you currently in good standing with respect to all of your competency exams?
Yes, I am.
Now, in addition to, you indicated you're assigned to the DNA unit, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you also cross-trained in other disciplines that are done by the lab?
Yes, I am also cross-trained as a crime scene response unit personnel.
Now, ma'am, can you please explain to us what DNA is?
Yes, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a genetic blueprint for human attributes such as height, hair color, eye color. And DNA comes from our parents, so half your DNA comes from your mother and half of your DNA comes from your father. 99% of our DNA is exactly the same. That's why we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, 2 arms and 2 legs. that less than 1% of DNA that's different is what we look for in forensic DNA typing, DNA analysis. That's how we individualize people and determine what DNA comes from what source. Everyone's DNA is different except for that of identical twins.
In that 1% of the DNA that you look at, is there a particular portion of that you look at?
Yes. The specific locations we look at on the DNA are throughout the DNA, and they're highly variable, so there's many different variations in those locations, and there's 15 locations that we look at, plus a melanogenin, which is the sex indicator, XX for female, XY for male.
And does your lab and do you conduct more than one type of DNA testing?
Yes, the lab conducts the usual DNA STR testing. That's on the entire human genome, all the chromosomes, and then we have YSTR testing, which is done only on the male portion of the DNA, the Y chromosome.
And under what circumstances typically would you do Y testing versus STR testing?
Typically, we do YSTR testing when we suspect that there's going to be a large amount of female DNA that could overshadow the male DNA that we would want to look for, or when sometimes there's a very low amount. We know there's going to be a very low amount of male versus a very high amount of female.
And typically, would that include if something was taken from a female's body or a female's person, where you suspect there's male DNA, but you know there's going to be that person's DNA?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, in this particular case, let me ask you this. Do you go into your testing knowing whether you're going to do Y or STR, or is there a step in your process at which you make that determination?
Based on the description type, and the results from the criminalistics report, we can determine that maybe this sample is going to go for YSTR testing, but we don't ultimately make the decision until the second step of DNA analysis.
And in particular, in this case, were you given the sperm fraction of or actually, let me ask you this, were you given the vaginal swab taken from the kit of Colleen Ritzer to conduct DNA testing on?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you have any information going into your testing that gave you a sense of whether you were going to do Y or STR?
Yes, I did note that there was a sperm cell that was found. I was given that information, so I had an idea that YSTR testing was going to be amenable.
Can you, let me ask you this, can you describe the process you go through to do Y testing? And actually, can you describe the process you went through in this particular case?
Yes, for the YSTR testing, we use a 4-step DNA analysis process. We because I knew that there was a sperm cell, I used what we call a differential extraction, which is the first step. So extraction is the first step, but because of the sperm cell that was indicated, I used differential extraction, which basically allows me to separate sperm cells from all other cells in the sample. So I take the sample, it comes in a tube, I add heat and chemicals, and I separate the sperm fraction from the rest of the cells, which we call the epithelial fraction, and then I clean out both, so we end up with a sperm fraction tube and an epithelial fraction tube with the rest of the cells. And then I clean up those samples, and I take those samples and I put them through the second step, which is quantitation. Quantitation basically just allows me to determine the amount of DNA that I have in those tubes. So I can see, okay, how much total DNA and how much male DNA do I have in both tubes, how much total and how much male DNA. And based on that, I'm able to come up with a ratio. Am I going to be able to expect to get a good male profile from a sample versus am I not going to expect? So if it's in a certain ratio, say like 100 to 1 human to male, then I would go for YSTR testing. So if the ratio's too large, then I will go for YSTR testing, knowing that I will probably end up with too much female in that sample. So in this case, I did go forward with the YSTR testing because I noticed that there was too much female. And at that step, I go to the third step, which is amplification. And amplification, I make millions of copies of the different locations, that 1% of DNA that's different between individuals. I make in the YSTR, with the YSTR kit, looking for just the male DNA, there are 17 locations that I look for, and a profile is obtained at the 4th step. It's called analysis. So at analysis, a profile gets produced, and the numbers get determined by a computer or an instrument, and I'm able to come up with the DNA profile. And once I have that profile, I can compare it to any known profiles that I have and make conclusions.
Now, you said that an instrument measures the DNA, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you're looking at it, what does it look like to you on that instrument?
It looks sort of like a heart monitor with the lines, and then a line comes up, and then there's a blip, and then another, and it goes back down, and then it comes up again, there's another blip, and every time that spike occurs, that blip occurs, that means that there's a piece of DNA there.
And does the computer or the program assign a size and a number to that blip?
Yes, the instrument is given what we call an allelic ladder. It's basically a ladder of a whole bunch of DNA pieces that we know what they are. It's a known standard to compare to. So that ladder has many, many blips, and we can take the profile, the questions profile that we're looking for. When the DNA pops up, we can compare it to that ruler, per se, and assign it a number.
And in this case, were you able to generate a Y profile for the sperm fraction of the vaginal swab taken from Colleen Ritzer?
Yes, I was able to obtain a partial YSTR profile.
And can you explain to the jury why you were able to obtain a partial profile?
A partial profile is a profile that doesn't include all 17 locations of the DNA that we're looking for. Only some of the locations were able to be obtained, and that's what we mean by a partial profile. That means we basically did not have that much DNA to work with. If we had plenty of DNA to work with, we would have a full profile, but because there was a smaller amount of DNA to work with from the beginning, from the start, we have a partial profile.
Did you come across any other challenges in producing the profile for the sperm fraction of the vaginal swab when you were doing your 4-step process?
Yes, while doing the 4-step process, I encountered a problem at step 2, quantitation. I was not able to determine how much male there was. I noticed that there was a significant amount of female, but I couldn't see with the instrument and the second step of quantitation how much male. And so I did a couple different things. I did dilutions to try to kind of thin out anything that could be inhibiting the profile from being seen. So I did, like a 1 to 10 and a 1 to 20 and a 1 to 50 dilution, and I was still unable to see anything. So I tried to concentrate the sample and kind of clean it up a little bit, and then did step 2 over again. So I did step 2 over again. I was still not able to see anything that would tell me how much male there was. So we determined that we would just go forward, amplify it, and see what we get.
And in fact, the fact that you were able to get a partial Y profile confirms that there was male DNA there. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And based on your training and experience, Ms. Castor, what kinds of things could cause that inhibition that you saw at the second step?
There's many different things that could inhibit DNA. That's why we clean up so much of it at the first step so that we can get the best profile we're able to obtain. And certain things are soil, leather, dyes. Certain dyes will inhibit the DNA processing. Hemoglobin and urea are some other examples.
Thank you. Now, did you, when you're doing any kind of DNA testing and you're testing the question samples, meaning samples that have come from other items, do you handle the standards?
I do not.
And what are the standards?
The standards are known profiles from individuals, taken directly from individuals.
And in this case, did you receive from another analyst the Y profile for Philip Chism?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to conduct a comparison between his Y profile and the partial sperm profile you got from the sperm fraction of the vaginal swab?
Yes, I was able to make a comparison.
May I approach this witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing you a chart, Ms. Castor, does that chart depict the DNA profile as you ultimately see it of Philip Chism with the partial DNA profile you obtained from the vaginal swab?
Yes, it is.
I would ask that you just mark for identification, Your Honor, and display for the jury.
You may.
This was Q. Okay. R for identification. Q, not stipulation, is Q. Q is a timeline.
I could give you a pointer. Now, Ms. Castor, before we begin, how does this profile differ from an STR profile?
This profile is coming from only the Y chromosome. So it's not looking through the entire rest of the human genome or other chromosomes. It's just for the male part, the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is only present in males. Females have XX, 2 X chromosomes, whereas males have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. When we look at the sections on the Y chromosome that are passed down from father to son, and so forth, and so these profiles could be shared between father and son and brothers. It would be the same. So unfortunately, it's not going to be able to individualize and tell me exactly which person, specifically which person this DNA profile came from, but it will narrow down father, son, any patrilineal line.
So the only people who should have this same Y profile as Philip Chism are any male relatives along his paternal line.
That's correct.
Now, what can you just explain to us what we're looking at? What are the descriptions on the left-hand column where it says sample description?
The samples here, the numbers here on the left-hand column are the different locations that we look for on the Y chromosome. For example, if you look at the first one, DYS456, D stands for DNA, Y stands for Y chromosome, S stands for single copy, and 456 is just the number. It's like an address on the Y chromosome. So all of these have some similar naming scheme here. These are the locations we look at that vary, highly variable between individuals.
And how many of the locations on the Y profile for the sperm fraction from the vaginal swab were you able to obtain a number that you can call?
If you look over here, this is the vaginal swab sperm fraction sample that I was testing. And anywhere here where you have a number, I was able to call a piece of DNA. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 locations.
And what do the asterisks reflect?
The asterisks reflect pieces of DNA that are between our calling threshold and our noise threshold. So basically, if you think of a radio, and you're trying to get the station to come in, and you hear kind of a static, and then you get to another station where you hear like little pieces of noise come up. Music, you know that's music. You know that's you're aware that that's somebody talking on the radio, but you're not getting the full like understanding of what song that is or what that person's talking about. That DNA that comes up kind of peeks itself out is what we call an asterisk here, and we're able to, the instrument's not able to call it, but we're able to use the ruler to determine what pieces of DNA that is.
So So let me ask you this, you can't give a number to those locations, but if you saw information inconsistent with Philip Chism's profile, would you factor that in?
Objection.
As it relates to the foundation, I'll see counsel at the sidebar for a moment.
Ms. Castor, when you yourself are examining that, the blips, what looks like sort of an EKG, are you able to make your own assessment of the information that is being produced as the DNA is sent through the machine?
Yes.
And for those areas that are below threshold, for which are represented by an asterisk, are you able to see information there, hear those little blips of noise on the radio, for lack of a better?
Yes, that's correct.
And you can't assign a number to those locations, nor can the machine. Is that fair to say?
The instrument doesn't assign the numbers because it's below our calling thresholds, and the instrument only assigns numbers above the calling threshold. So those peaks below threshold are actually assigned by myself and also by my double reader. It's an additional person who looks at the DNA profiles and does their own assessment without talking to me first.
So you assign a number, but you don't report the number. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct. We don't want to report the number because we don't want to do any statistical analysis at that location, which could skew the meaning of the data.
But if the number you assign at a given location is not consistent with the standard you have, would you exclude that person as the source of the Y profile?
Yes, that's correct.
So you use that information for exclusion, but not for inclusion. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that exactly. I would, we use those numbers to make our conclusions, either exclude or include. And if there's an inconsistency, if it doesn't match up, then we would definitely take that into account. We wouldn't just, say, oh, the ones that are called match, the ones that don't, we take that into account. And if, and on the flip side, if they...
Okay. Objection from this point on, or objection to the whole?
From this point on.
Okay. Objection sustained. You can have another question if you'd like it.
Thank you. Ms. Castor, you just mentioned something about statistics. Are you able to generate, well, actually, before we go into that, there's a couple of locations that say NR. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, if you look here, and here, you'll see NR. NR just means no results. There was no piece of DNA at that location that we could see.
So you can't get any information at that location.
That's correct.
And again, what are some of the causes that why does that happen? Why is there just no information in those locations?
Typically you see NRs when there's a low level of DNA. So the DNA that we started out with wasn't, expected to be a lot of DNA, and it's typical that something like that, a partial profile, would have some locations that have no results.
Now, you mentioned earlier about generating statistics. So in this case, would it be fair to say you were able to generate statistics for the 8 locations where you could report a number?
Yes, that's correct.
And how are the statistics generated? How does that work?
With YSDR testing, because it is passed down from father to son, we do what we call a counting method. Basically, we have a database with thousands and thousands of profiles, and we count how many times we see this profile in that database. With this, we just counted how many times we saw the profile with the 8 locations.
And are you then able to generate a statistical frequency of that profile within various populations?
Yes, that's
And
correct.
is there any real significance, let me ask you this, the various populations that they use, do they correlate in any way to the defendant's ethnicity?
We use 4 different population databases, and it's, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian, African American, and we just use those 4 because they're, the most, there's many other different population groups, but these are the most ones that represent our state, and there's no real significance between the different population groups. We just do that to try to get every single population, but there's no significant difference between them.
When DNA was first getting started, did anyone know whether there would be significant variations among different ethnic groups?
No, they didn't.
So is that why multiple groups are used in case there is differentiation among different ethnic groups?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And with respect to the profile the 8-location profile you were able to generate for the sperm fraction, what was the statistical frequency of that profile within the various populations?
Okay. Your Honor, may I refer to my notes
If
for?
your memory is exhausted and there's no objection.
No objection.
Yes, you may.
The statistical significance, frequency of occurrence of this profile from the vaginal swabs, it's 1 in 521 of the African American population, 1 in 1,114 of the Asian population, 1 in 167 of the Caucasian population, and 1 in 455 of the Hispanic population.
In addition to the frequency with which a profile appears in those populations, are you also able to generate a statistic for the percentage of those populations who are excluded as the sources of that profile?
Yes, I was.
And can you give us those, what percentage of the population is excluded as a source of that 8-location profile?
Based on the frequency, I was able to calculate the percent exclusion as 99.8% excluded from the African American population, 99.91% of the Asian population excluded, 99.4% of the Caucasian population excluded, and 99.78% of the Hispanic population excluded.
Thank you. We could get the lights on. Now, at some point, did you receive some additional items in this case for DNA testing?
Yes, I did.
And with respect to those items, were you able to do, ultimately able to do STR testing?
Yes, I was able to do STR DNA testing, which is testing, DNA testing on all of the chromosomes, not just the Y chromosome.
And how many items, if you remember, did you receive for testing in this case, ultimately?
I received 8 items for STR testing.
And if we could start with the swab of the red-brown stain from the left palm of Philip Chism, was that an item that you received for testing?
Yes, it was.
And did you go through that 4-step process with respect to the swab of the red-brown stain on the left palm of Philip Chism?
Yes, I did. And in these cases, I didn't separate, a sperm fraction and an epithelial fraction, because we didn't have any sperm present in this. We're looking for red-brown stain. So I just did a regular extraction with 1 tube going through the whole process of the 4 steps.
And were you able to generate a profile for the DNA from the swab of the red-brown stain on the left palm of Philip Chism?
Yes, I was.
Did that profile have 1 contributor or more than 1 contributor?
That profile had a mix of at least 2 individuals.
And for you, when you're looking on that EKG, how do you know there's more than 1 contributor?
If you recall from what I said before, that half your DNA comes from your mother and half your DNA comes from your father. You should get 1 piece of DNA from your mother and 1 from your father for a total of 2 pieces of DNA. If I see 3 pieces of DNA or more, that indicates to me that there is a mixture and it's not just from 1 person.
Is there such a thing as a major and a minor contributor to a profile?
Yes. If someone contributes a substantial amount of DNA more than another person, you'll get what we call a major profile versus a minor profile. So that major profile will have blips on that EKG that are way up high, versus that minor profile will have tiny little blips down below. And so you can determine that all the ones with the major, big amounts of DNA is the major profile, where all the smaller ones are the minor.
And in the case of the red-brown stain on the left palm of Philip Chism, was there a major profile?
Yes, there was.
And were you able to compare that major profile to an STR profile you received for Philip Chism?
Yes.
And let me ask you this, ultimately with respect to this item, was there another item that had the same statistics as this item?
Yes.
So I'm going to go through that item so you don't have to repeat the statistics multiple times, okay? So with respect to, did you also examine a swab of a red-brown stain with flow from the wall near the door of the 2nd floor bathroom?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, with respect to that particular item, were you able to generate a DNA profile for that item?
Yes, I was able to obtain a profile with a mixture of at least 2 individuals.
And again, with respect to that item, was there a major and a minor?
Yes, there was a major and a major female with a minor.
Okay. And with respect to those 2 items, did you compare the major profile you obtained from the swab of the red-brown stain on the left palm of Philip Chism and the swab of the red-brown stain with flow from the bathroom to the DNA profiles of Colleen Ritzer and Philip Chism?
I did.
And what were your results with respect to the comparison to Colleen Ritzer's DNA profile?
The major female profile that I obtained from both those items matched Colleen Ritzer.
And what is the statistical frequency of that particular DNA profile that matched that of Colleen Ritzer?
Your Honor, may I look at? Thank you.
There's no objection. Your memory's exhausted, you may.
Thank you.
I apologize, I didn't hear the.
She can refer to her notes to read
Yes,
the
oh,
sentence.
no objection, sorry.
So the frequency of the profile obtained from the major female profiles obtained from those items were 1 in 49.04 sextillion for the African American population, 1 in 20.53 sextillion of the Asian population, 1 in 22.51 quintillion of the Caucasian population, and 1 in 248 quintillion of the Hispanic population.
And ma'am, do you know how many people are believed to be on the planet at this point approximately?
Approximately 6.5 billion.
And fair to say that billions are less than sextillions or quintillions, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, in addition to those 2 items, was there also another series of items that ultimately ended up having the same statistical frequency?
Yes.
Okay. And, well, let me ask you this before we move on. What was the results of your comparison to Philip Chism of those 2 items, the swab of the red-brown stain on the left palm and the swab of the red-brown stain with flow?
Philip Chism's profile did not match the major female profile from those items.
He's excluded as a source of those profiles, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, did you also test swabs or scrapings from white stains on the interior crotch of the underpants recovered from Philip Chism's backpack?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to obtain a DNA profile from that item?
Yes, I was able to obtain a single source female profile.
And similarly, were you able to obtain a profile from a swab of a red-brown stain on the blade of a box cutter recovered from Philip Chism's backpack?
Yes, I was also able to obtain a single source female profile.
And also, were you able to obtain a profile from a swab of a red-brown stain at the end of the stick near the vaginal area of Colleen Ritzer at Danvers High School?
Yes, I obtained a single source female profile.
Additionally, were you able to obtain a profile from the cutting of a red-brown stain on a toilet paper roll in the middle stall of the second-floor bathroom at Danvers High School?
Yes, I obtained a single source female profile.
And finally, were you able to obtain a profile from a swab of a red-brown saturation stain on the left leg of jeans located in a wooded area at Danvers High School?
I obtained a single source female profile from that item.
And with respect to those items, the swabbing from the underpants, from the box cutter, from the end of the stick or branch, from the toilet paper roll, and the jeans, did you compare fair to say you obtained the same single source DNA profile from those items?
I did. It was the same female single source profile.
And did you compare that profile to the profile of Colleen Ritzer?
I did.
And what were the results of that comparison?
Colleen Ritzer's DNA profile matched that of the single source female profile obtained from those items.
And were you able to generate a statistical frequency for that particular profile?
Yes.
If you, is your memory exhausted as to what that statistical frequency is?
Yes.
If you could refer to your notes.
Thank you. The frequency of the single source female profile obtained from these items were 1 in 49.04 sextillion of the African American population, 1 in 20.53 sextillion of the Asian population, 1 in 22.51 quintillion of the Caucasian population, and 248 quintillion, 1 in 248 quintillion of the Hispanic population.
And finally, ma'am, with respect to swabs or scrapings from the rear interior waistband of those pair of jeans that were found, in the woods, were you able to obtain a DNA profile from the swab or scrapings of the rear interior waistband?
Yes, I was able to obtain a DNA profile with a mixture of at least 2 individuals.
And did that have a major and a minor contributor?
It did.
Were you able to generate any results for the major profile in comparison to that of Colleen Ritzer?
The major female profile obtained matched the DNA profile from Colleen Ritzer.
And what was the statistical frequency of that profile? And if your memory is exhausted, if you could return to your notes.
The frequency of that major female profile is 1 in 49.04 sextillion of the African American population, 1 in 20.53 sextillion of the Asian population, 1 in 22.51 quintillion of the Caucasian population, and 1 in 248 quintillion of the Hispanic population.
And I'm not sure I asked you this with respect to the last series of items, including the underpants, the box cutter, and the branch, the toilet paper roll, and the jeans. What was the comparison to Philip Chism for those items?
He was excluded from those items.
And with respect to the last item, we talked about the swab or scraping of the interior of the waistband of the jeans. Was he included or excluded from the major profile?
He was excluded from the major profile.
If I could just have one moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
I have nothing further to this cast, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, assume, or if, Foxborough Stadium holds approximately 60,000 people, okay? And if those 60,000 people were random African-American men, it's correct to assume that some of those men would have a profile like the profile you gave us the statistics on, correct?
I don't think I can say yes to that. I'm not quite understanding.
Well, if you take 60,000 random African-American men, given the statistics that you gave us today of 1 in 521, the statistics would indicate that there probably would be some men in the 60,000 random African-American men that had the profile.
It's an estimation. It's not really saying that because if you pool together this many people, there's going to be somebody there. It's more of an estimation to tell you how common or rare a profile is. Not necessarily that if you pull together random 60,000 people that someone's definitely going to be there, because it could be equally that all of them are going to have that profile versus none of them are going to have that profile.
But your statistic is a frequency statistic, right? It's how frequent it is over the population of African-American men, right?
It's a frequency that gives us kind of an estimation of how common or rare.
Right. And the estimation is 1 in 521 African-American men will have this profile.
Yes.
And the estimation is 1 in 167 Caucasian men will have this profile.
Yes.
So this statistic is nowhere near as precise as the statistic you gave us of the DNA testing you did on the other items, correct?
That's correct. The different methods of calculating.
But, and so the statistic means that in a group of 60,000 African-American men, that an estimate would be that 1 out of every 521 would have this profile.
I'll sustain the objection, but you can have the area of inquiry. Can I see counsel to the sidebar for a moment, please?
Okay, I'm going to try this question just one more time. I'm sorry, I apologize. So assume that Foxborough Stadium holds 60,000 African-American men that reflect the general population. It would be expected that a certain number of those men would have a profile that was consistent, right?
I can't say yes to you because it would be kind of misleading, because if you think of it like a lottery ticket system, you go buy a lottery ticket, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of winning. You could win 2-3 times in that chance, or you could win not at all. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to find that someone with that profile if you gather a group of men together. It's just to tell you how common or rare, like how often are you going to win? You're going to play a lottery with 1 in 100 chance to win, or 1 in 1,000 chance to win. It just tells you, oh, well, if I play this, you'll have more of a chance to win. So it's more of an estimation of just how common or rare. It's not a number that says this is definitely how many men you're going to find if you gather together this many people.
I'm not asking you to say definitively. What I'm asking you is that you could estimate that you would find some men that would fit the profile.
Yes, if you want to estimate how often or how common it's going to be, yes, that's the number. That's 1 in 521.
And for Caucasians, 1 out of 167 would, it could be estimated, would match the profile, correct?
Yes, that's the estimate, yeah.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Pizzolini, later on?
First of all, you don't only look at the African American and Caucasian populations, do you, regardless of the ethnicity of the defendant?
That's correct.
Because you have to look at all of the populations, because there isn't actually that much distinction statistically among the populations in the frequency of Y profiles.
That's correct. If you look at the percent exclusion, they're all around the same amount.
And that's what I was going to ask you about. So the frequency of the profile in the African American population is 1 in 521, but 99.8% of the population would be excluded as having that profile.
Yes.
And for the Asian population, 99.91% of the population are excluded.
Yes.
And for the Caucasian population, 99.4% of the population.
Yes, that's correct.
And finally, for the Hispanic population, 99.78% are excluded. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I have nothing further.
Okay. Any requests, Mr.
But you also gave us the statistics of 1 in 521 African American men, right?
Yes.
And 1 in 167 Caucasian men, correct?
Yes.
And you gave us the statistic for Hispanic men and for Asian men, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And those are scientifically valid.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah G. of Contact, and we did a DC in the Washington.
Sure.
raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God? I do. You may be seated.
Just take your seat and just face us on it briefly, and you can see.
Good morning, ma'am. It's been a motion to sequester witnesses in the case, so until all the evidence is over, you can only be in the courtroom when you testify. You can't talk about your testimony with the other witnesses, or let them talk about their testimony with you. And the sequestration order for being in the courtroom has the exclusion discussed at the sidebar.
Good morning, ma'am. Can you please state your first and last names for the jury?
Sarah Giaquinta,
And can you spell your names?
Sarahgiaquinta.
Ms. Giaquinta, how old are you?
31.
Are you married?
Yes.
To whom are you married?
Andrew Giaquinta?
And ma'am, do you work?
Yes.
What do you do for work?
I teach high school.
And where do you teach?
Danvers High School.
What subject do you teach?
Math.
How long have you been a math teacher at Danvers High School?
This is my 4th year at Danvers.
And had you taught somewhere before Danvers?
Yes.
Where was that?
Brookline High School
And when did you begin at Danvers High School?
in 2012, September.
And were there a number of new math teachers that year in September of 2012?
Yes, there were 4 of us.
And who were those 4?
Colleen Ritzer, Todd Butterworth, Christopher Carlson, and myself.
And did you develop a relationship with Colleen Ritzer?
I did.
What was your relationship with her?
We became good friends and colleagues.
And how often during the school day would you see Colleen?
Quite a few times, 4 or 5, maybe more.
And if we could, where was your classroom located in October of 2013 at Danvers High School?
My classroom was in room 221.
If we could use the educational on the chalk. Do you recognize that to be Danvers High School, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. And if we could go to the next. And then the next. Ma'am, if I tell you the blue classroom is Colleen Ritzer's classroom, and the yellow is the girls' room, can you, with the pointer in front of you, indicate where your classroom is? Or was, rather.
Right there.
Okay, so on the other hallway from Colleen Ritzer's classroom.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, under what circumstances we can take that down. Under what circumstances would you see Ms. Ritzer during the day?
Just check-ins, usually at the beginning of the school day to say hello. We would have lunch together, sometimes in between classes if we had a moment. Usually during a free block, if we had one together, we would spend it together.
And drawing your attention to October 22nd of 2013, were you working on that day?
Yes.
Was there anything particular about the way you dressed for work that day?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes, it was Dress Like Your Friend Day for Spirit Week, and we dressed the same.
You dressed the same as who?
As Colleen.
And what were you wearing?
Black pants and a purplish shirt.
Okay. And were other faculty doing the same thing that day?
Yes, a lot of faculty dressed like their friends, and her freshman team also dressed in the same way.
Okay. And freshman team meaning freshman team of teachers, not freshman team of students, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, on October 22nd of 2013, when does the regular school day end, meaning the actual classes that students are required to attend?
1:55.
And did you have anywhere to go at 1:55?
Yes, I had a meeting right after school.
Okay. And about how long did that meeting last?
10, maybe 15 minutes.
When what part of the school was your meeting located in?
In the principal's office.
And when your meeting was complete, where did you go?
To Colleen's classroom.
And when you arrived at Colleen's classroom, what happened?
There were 2 students in there. And we started to talk, and I asked if we could go across the hall to another room where there weren't any students, so that we could continue to talk.
Did you note at that time the gender of the two students in Colleen's classroom?
One was female and one was male.
Did you personally recognize or know those students?
No.
And where did you and Colleen go from there?
Across the hall to Todd's classroom.
Do you know about how long you spent talking in Todd's classroom?
Maybe 10 minutes.
During that part of your conversation, were you talking about your meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, did you move from Todd Butterworth's classroom?
Yes. After about 10 minutes or so, we started to head back to her classroom.
And did you continue to talk as you were heading back to her classroom?
We did.
And in fact, did you linger in the hall for any amount of time?
Yes.
At some point, did you ask her whether she needed to get back to her classroom?
Yes.
And specifically, what, if anything, did she tell you about the girl in her classroom?
Objection.
Overruled.
She said that the girl was just drawing on her board.
And did she make any specific statement about why the boy in her classroom was there?
Objection.
I'll see you at the sidebar, please.
What did Colleen say to you just about why the boy was in her classroom?
She said, I don't know why he's here.
And did you two then go on to talk about other things?
We did.
What were you talking about?
Hair shampoo, students having lice. Her sister had had lice in the past. What to use if your scalp was itchy. Just regular, everyday things that we would talk about.
And at some point, did you have any conversation with her about how you were going to get home?
I did.
Had your transportation been an issue in the time leading up to October 22nd?
Yes.
What was the problem?
My car had broken down, so I didn't have a car.
And how had you been getting to and from school or from school?
Sometimes I would take my husband's truck, and sometimes Colleen would give me a ride home.
And did you have any conversation with her regarding that situation outside the classroom?
Objection.
I overrule the objection, but provide limited instruction if you want it, Ms. Regan. And if you'd like to be heard at the sidebar, I'll hear.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Overruled.
You can answer the question. Did you have any conversation with Colleen about that situation with your transportation?
I did. She had offered to give me a ride home if I needed one that day, and I had told her that I didn't need one.
Ma'am, at some point you've had an opportunity to review video from the school surveillance system regarding a portion of your conversation with Colleen that afternoon. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that video a fair and accurate depiction of you and Ms. Ritzer in the hallway that afternoon?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point I would ask to play a portion of the video.
Maybe play.
Fair to say this is when you're talking about the hair and lice, Ms.
Yes.
Giaquinta? And where is Colleen's classroom with respect to this?
Just behind her. The door is right to her left.
And Ms. Giaquinta, when you were speaking to Ms. Ritzer that afternoon, did you notice any abrasions or injuries to her face or her chin?
No.
Ms. Giaquinta, was Ms. Ritzer's demeanor the whole time you were talking to her that afternoon essentially as it is in that video?
Yes.
And when you parted ways with her, where did you go?
Back to my classroom.
Would you remember when you left the school that day?
Just after 3, maybe around 3:10.
Did you have any further contact with Colleen before leaving the school?
No.
Did you hear from her at all over the course of that afternoon?
No.
At some point, did you hear from someone regarding her?
Yes.
Who was that?
Her mom.
As a result of hearing from Peg Ritzer, what, if anything, did you do?
I told her I would go to the high school and see if Colleen's car was still there.
And did you do that?
I did.
Who did you go with?
My husband.
When you arrived at Danvers High School, do you know about what time that was?
Maybe around 9 o'clock, just before.
And when you, let me ask you this, over the course of the next couple of hours, were you at Danvers High School as various personnel arrived?
Yes.
At some point, were you shown some video of a male going into the girls' room?
Yes.
And did you recognize that male?
Not at the time.
At some point, did you see video of the male that you recognized?
Yes.
Who did you recognize that person as?
Philip Chism.
Did you recognize him as the person you had seen in Colleen's classroom that afternoon?
Yes.
I have no further questions for Ms. Gill.
I have no questions, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor, I would move to admit the video.
No objection.
Your Honor, at this point, I would also move to admit the entirety of the 91 videos. I believe some were taken to Bene when they first came in through Officer Baldessari, but they've now been testified to by Officer Sullivan.
Okay. Any objection?
No objection.
That may be admitted now, no longer than.
And Your Honor, while we're at it, I believe by agreement with the keeper affidavit, I'd be introducing records from J.P. Morgan Chase.
Oh, can you see them?
Yes.
They already had a number, right?
The 51. The 51.
No objection.
Admitted.
Exhibit 129.
I would call Dr. Anna McDonald.
Miss, would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Just have a seat. Turn to face the judge and give you some instructions.
Doctor, make yourself comfortable, please. You have a seat, make yourself comfortable. Thank you. Is there a motion to sequester witnesses in the case of until all the evidence is over? You can only be in the courtroom when you're testifying. You can't talk about your testimony, the other witnesses, I'll let them talk about these with you. Thank you. Ms. McDougall, please.
Good morning, Dr. McDonald. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm Dr. Anna McDonald.
Can you spell your first and last names, ma'am?
My first name is spelled A-N-N-A, and my last name is McDonald, M-C-D-O-N-A-L-D.
Dr. McDonald, how are you currently employed?
I'm employed by Wake Forest University in North Carolina. I am a forensic pathologist.
And ma'am, can you briefly describe for us your educational background?
Sure. So I went to Davidson College in North Carolina for my undergraduate. I then went on to medical school at Duke University. And then I came up to Massachusetts after completing my medical school, and I did an anatomic and clinical pathology residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. And then I proceeded to do 2 fellowships after that in order to get subspecialty training. One was in pediatric pathology at Children's Hospital, and the other was in forensic pathology at the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner.
And for how long were you at the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
A little over a year.
Now, Dr. McDonald, are you licensed to practice medicine?
Yes.
In what states are you licensed, or have you been licensed?
I have been licensed to practice in Massachusetts, and I now am licensed to practice in North Carolina.
And are you board certified?
Yes.
In what areas of medicine are you board certified?
Sure. I'm board certified in anatomic and clinical pathology, so what I did my residency in. And then I'm also board certified in pediatric pathology and forensic pathology.
And can you explain to the jury the distinction in those areas of pathology that the 3 areas you're board certified in?
So pathology in general is a specialty of medicine, much like pediatrics or internal medicine. And it specializes essentially in the laboratory aspects of disease. So we deal with body fluids, body tissue, and in the case of autopsies, we deal with obviously the full body. So I trained in that. That's a 4-year process. And then pediatric pathology looks at the pathology unique to the pediatric population. And then forensics then looks at injuries and diseases that we see in autopsy pathology specifically.
And Ma'am, can you describe for us what your duties and responsibilities were when you were employed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Boston?
Yes. So during a fellowship, you complete approximately 200 autopsies under the supervision of a board-certified forensic pathologist. And as a part of doing the autopsy, you complete both external and internal exams on those cases, as well as look at histologic sections, little pieces of tissue under the microscope related to those cases, as well as look at other laboratory data like toxicology related to them. Ultimately generate a report called an autopsy report.
And Dr. McDonald, did you conduct the autopsy of Colleen Ritzer on October 24th of 2013?
I did.
And when your process, what is the first thing you do when you begin conducting an autopsy?
So an autopsy begins with, as I said, an external examination. It's not dissimilar to getting a physical at the physician. You go from head to toe, looking just at the outside of the body, trying to see things that are relatively normal, like hair color, things like that, as well as looking for injuries.
And in addition, in this particular case, did you take note of what clothing Ms. Ritzer was wearing when she arrived at the medical examiner's office?
I did. That's part of an external examination.
Okay. It would be fair to say she was partially clothed when she arrived?
That's correct.
May I approach this witness room? Ma'am, showing you the item in this bag, do you recognize this item?
I do, yes.
What do you recognize that item to be?
That is the long sleeve purple shirt that the decedent was wearing upon autopsy external examination.
And is this shirt in essentially the same condition it was in when you observed it on Ms. Ritzer?
It is.
And specifically with respect to, I believe, what you called a defect in the shirt, was that present when you examined it on her that day?
Yes, it was.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit. Showing you a second item, do you recognize that?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That was the white undershirt that was beneath the purple shirt we just saw.
And is this in essentially the same condition it was in when you observed it on Ms. Ritzer?
Yes, it is.
Was there anything of note of how those two shirts, the purple sweater and the white tank top, were arranged on Ms. Ritzer when she arrived at the ME's office?
They were both pulled above her breasts.
And that's the key mark to the next exhibit.
131.
I'm showing you one more item. Do you recognize that, Dr. McDonald?
Yes, this is the tan-colored bra on the decedent.
And was this, is this in essentially the same condition it was in when you observed it on Ms. Ritzer?
Yes.
And was there anything of note of how this was arranged on her body when she arrived at the ME's office?
The cups of the bra were pulled down to expose her breasts.
Yes.
Route 132.
Dr. McDonald, as part of your external examination, let me ask you this, at some point was the clothing removed from Ms. Ritzer so you could conduct your further examination?
Yes.
And as part of your external examination, did you take, what kinds of things are you looking to take note of in the exterior of a person?
So to begin an external examination, you essentially try to globally look at the whole body to see what state it is in. So her body was intact, and it seemed to be covered with organic debris, so leaves, pine needles, dirt.
And did you note, and let me ask you this, at some point is she then cleaned so that you can do a more thorough examination?
Yes.
And was that done in this case?
Yes.
And at that point, did you take note of any bruises, abrasions, or contusions on her body?
Yes.
What did you know?
So she had an abrasion or a skin scrape under the right side of her jaw. She had a contusion or a bruise above her left breast. And she also had a contusion or a bruise on the right upper side of her abdomen.
And with respect to her extremities, her arms and legs, did you note anything?
Yes, so there were two contusions or bruises as well on her, around her right elbow. There was one right here, sort of on the medial side of her elbow. And then there was a blue contusion also on the back of her elbow.
And are you, as a doctor, able to age or date bruises at all?
In the forensic community, no.
And additionally, with respect to abrasions or scrapes, are you able to date those at all?
No.
Moving to the head and face, did you take note of anything on external examination of the head and face?
So the head and face had abundant petechiae. Petechiae are small little pinpoint hemorrhages that are seen on the surface of the skin and in mucosal membranes. So I could see abundant petechiae on her face and around her eyes.
And what do they actually look like to you as you're looking at Colleen Ritzer's face?
Sure. So they look essentially like little pinpoint red dots or hemorrhages underneath the skin.
And what is the significance to you as a forensic pathologist of petechiae in those locations around the eyes and mouth?
So petechiae on a decedent, particularly in around the face, around the eyes, within the eyes, which was also present here, and within her mouth, all had these petechiae. It's a red flag to a forensic pathologist to look for evidence of asphyxia.
What is the mechanism through one gets petechiae through when being asphyxiated?
So there are different methods by which someone can be asphyxiated. The easiest way to understand is if pressure is applied to the neck. There's obviously a lot of important structures going up and down your neck. Those include arteries taking blood to your brain, veins that drain blood from your head. So we have a bunch of vessels within that area. And when you apply pressure to the neck, the veins collapse first, and it kind of creates a high pressure system whereby blood essentially ruptures out of very small capillaries or small blood vessels around the face, in the eyes, and in the mouth.
And is that what creates those pinpoint areas you can see?
That is correct, yes.
In terms of doing a further examination for evidence of asphyxia, did you do that ultimately with respect to Ms. Ritzer?
Yes.
And what else do you look for?
Sure. So in cases of asphyxia or where you suspect asphyxia, a dedicated neck dissection is always performed. You can imagine if pressure is being put on your neck, you might get abrasions, skin scrapes, contusions or bruises around the neck area. You may also get hemorrhage into the muscles of your neck, because there's a lot of muscles that are protecting your neck and allowing us to move our head around. So you're looking for hemorrhages into those muscles as well. Internally, even further, imagine if more pressure is applied, you could actually break the cartilages in your neck as well, the thyroid cartilage and the hyoid bone, all of which were looked for in this specific case.
Were there any challenges to looking for those particular findings in this particular case, given other injuries?
Yes.
What was that?
The neck was obscured by a variety of sharp force injuries, so it was difficult to identify hemorrhage within the muscles as related to pressure on the neck, or was it related to the sharp force injuries?
Did you find any broken or torn or broken cartilage in the neck that you associated with asphyxiation?
No, I did not.
Is there anything about Ms. Ritzer's age and health at the time of her death that made it less likely to find injury in her neck from asphyxiation?
So younger individuals, these neck cartilages that I was describing, the thyroid cartilage and this hyoid bone, are less ossified, meaning they're less mineralized. And so they're essentially more pliable or flexible. So it's more challenging to break a more flexible cartilage than it is a bony one. So in someone this age, it would be more flexible and thus less likely to break.
Now, you referenced that there was a significant sharp force injury to the neck. Is that
Yes.
correct? Did you ultimately document how many sharp force injuries you could count on the neck area?
I did.
And how many was that?
So to the neck area, there were 12 stab wounds and 4 incised wounds.
And what's the distinction?
So when documenting sharp force injuries, you look at how long they are on the skin surface and how deep they are, among other characteristics. And so stab wounds are shorter on the surface of the skin than they are deep, so something that could be produced by a knife. Incised wounds are essentially an incision, so it is longer on the skin surface than it is deep.
And how did you go about documenting or memorializing the 16 total sharp force wounds you found to Colleen Ritzer's neck?
So by convention, I lettered them A through P.
And did you diagram them to assist you in remembering their location?
Yes.
Dr. McDonald, I've placed a document in front of you. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Who produced that document?
This is a dedicated neck diagram from the autopsy that I produced during the procedure.
And did you use that to note for yourself where each of the injuries are?
I did.
Would that assist you in explaining the injuries to the jury?
It would.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 133.
What is the distinction between those injuries you've marked in green and those you've marked in yellow?
So I've color-coded them on this photocopy to indicate the stab wounds versus the incised wounds for a matter of nomenclature to remember them.
Okay. And of the 16 wounds altogether, how many of them struck major structures?
So you can see here that I've circled an outline in red of A, B, C, and D, and those involved major structures within the neck.
So if we could start with those that didn't, that would be E through P. Can you describe for us what you observed or noted about injuries E through P depicted on the right side of the diagram, I believe?
Yes.
And that would be the left side of Ms. Ritzer's neck, is that
correct?
Okay.
Correct. So E, F, G, I, L, K, M, N, O, and P are all stab wounds that involve, they obviously perforate the skin and involve the soft tissue underneath, again, but did not hit a major structure. The green H and J, those are incised wounds that again involved the soft tissue under the skin but did not hit a major structure.
And you had mentioned earlier that you sometimes dissect the neck in order to look for further injury from asphyxiation, is that correct?
Absolutely.
And what type of an instrument do you use when you're dissecting the neck?
So a dedicated neck dissection involves essentially removing structures in layers to try to understand which structures within the neck are involved. So you'd remove the skin and the tissue right under the skin, and then you take the muscles back in certain layers before you look at the arteries and veins in the neck, as well as the trachea or the windpipe.
And as you are doing that dissection, are you able to feel a difference depending on what structures you're cutting through?
Yes.
What's the sort of distinction as you're doing a dissection of the neck in terms of difficulty or ease of making those dissections?
So skin and soft tissue essentially feel different with a knife than muscle. And beneath the muscle, you come to the trachea or the windpipe, and that's made of cartilaginous rings and those neck cartilage as I was describing. So it is a more difficult structure to cut through. And finally, in the very back of the neck, you have the spine, and obviously the spine is made of bone, among other things, and so that structure is the hardest.
And fair to say that the scalpel that you use is made for this very purpose and is sharpened for this very purpose?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
Excuse me, Mr. Dugal, I think we'll take the morning recess. If I could ask you to step down, Doctor, and I'll see counsel at the sidebar while the jury is leaving. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury at 11 will bring you in unless you need more time. Take the time that you need. Do not discuss the case among yourselves with anybody else during the recess. And I'll just see counsel at the sidebar for a moment.